Naomi's father was mid-sentence when the agents walked in, and by the time they walked him out, everyone in that ballroom already knew. The most beloved man in the room had been living a lie. The ballroom was gold and beautiful, and her father was smiling. That was the last image Naomi Fletcher would carry with her for years. Her father beneath the chandelier light, a microphone in both hands. The banner above his head reading Philanthropist of the Year in gilded letters. He was mid-sentence, saying something gracious about legacy and community, and the room was warm with applause. Then the doors opened. Federal agents crossed the marble floor in a straight line, and the applause didn't slow. It stopped, violently, like a sound cut from a film reel. Gerald Fletcher. You are under arrest for financial fraud and charitable asset laundering. Her father's smile held for 3 seconds too long. Then it collapsed. Naomi moved forward without deciding to. Dad. He didn't look at her. He looked to the far end of the hall. And at the far end of the hall, standing completely still, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, was Sebastian Alder. She had seen him in magazine covers. Business publications that used single-word headlines. Power. Vision. Uncompromising. She knew his reputation the way you know the weather of a city you've never visited. In broad, second-hand strokes. He was 39. He had built 3 companies into empires. He had a particular habit of exposing rot in industries that had grown comfortable with it, and he did it quietly, efficiently, without spectacle. His competitors didn't call him ruthless because they were exaggerating. They called him ruthless because nothing else fit. He wasn't watching her father being escorted out. He was watching her, not with satisfaction, not with cruelty, with the particular stillness of a man who has made a decision he already finished grieving. Someone near Naomi whispered, low and certain if Alder testified, it was already over before tonight. The doors closed behind her father. The room exhaled. Cameras pivoted. A reporter near the exit was already speaking into her phone. Naomi stood in the center of it all, in her burgundy dress, braids falling over her shoulders, and felt the world she had trusted entirely come apart at its seams. Later, she would remember that she looked at Sebastian Alder and did not look away. Neither did he. From that moment onward, she watched every interview, read every headline, sat with every word that described the man who had testified against her father, and felt only one thing clarify beneath the grief, and the shock and the shame. He had known, long before that night, and he had stood in that room and waited. He had destroyed her family without looking away. And she had made a decision, standing there in the wreckage of the ballroom, that would take her years to carry out. She was going to dismantle everything he built. 7 years is a long time to turn grief into a plan. Naomi had done it methodically. An MBA from Wharton, a carefully constructed resume through 3 firms, mergers at the first, risk architecture at the second, corporate governance, the kind that could be quietly weaponized, at the third. She had not been unfocused. She had not wandered. Every credential, every contact, every skill she accumulated was a brick laid deliberately toward one destination: Alder Group, the parent company of Sebastian Alder's empire. She submitted her application on a Tuesday morning. She sat at her kitchen table in her Harlem apartment, braids pinned up, and she typed her cover letter with the kind of calm that only comes from having rehearsed something so many times it stops feeling real. She pressed send. She closed the laptop. If I can't undo what he did, I will dismantle what he built. The interview was on a Thursday. She wore slate gray, minimal jewelry. She walked into the Alder Group headquarters on the 43rd floor of a midtown tower and introduced herself to the receptionist with easy confidence. She was shown into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling glass and a long table and a view of the city that was designed to make people feel small. She sat down and felt nothing of the kind. When the door opened, she already knew it would be him. She had prepared for it, had rehearsed the precise quality of stillness she would hold, the exact composition she would wear, the specific blankness that would communicate nothing useful. Sebastian Alder walked in and looked at her, and did not react. Not a flicker. Not a pause. Not a single visible signal that he recognized her face from a ballroom 7 years ago, or 100 news cycles, or the particular way she had looked at him across a crowded room when her entire life was collapsing. He sat down. He opened her file. He read it in silence for a moment that lasted slightly longer than necessary. Then he looked up and asked only one question. "Can you work effectively for someone you consider your enemy?" The room was very quiet. Naomi held his gaze without difficulty. "I can work for anyone," she said. Something moved behind his eyes. She couldn't name it. It was gone before she could. He closed the file. "You start Monday." She had expected him to be difficult, had braced for it. The quiet sabotage of a powerful man who recognized a threat and moved against it. Had prepared for exclusion, for the particular corporate coldness that buries people without leaving fingerprints. What she had not prepared for was this. He left her alone, not in the way of neglect. In the way of deliberate restraint. He was precise, professional, and kept every interaction at a distance that was almost architectural, as though he had drawn a perimeter around her and held himself strictly to its edge. In boardroom meetings, he listened to her without expression. He never praised her publicly. He never undermined her either. But things happened. In her 3rd week, a senior VP attempted to run a competing proposal over hers in a quarterly review. A move so smoothly executed it was nearly invisible. Sebastian noticed it, said 3 sentences quietly, and the proposal was tabled. He did not tell Naomi about it. She found out from a colleague who had watched it happen with barely concealed shock. In her 2nd month, she was assigned a new project. Clean, high visibility, the kind that builds internal reputation. No explanation given. He never called her into his office alone. Never lingered after a meeting ended. Never gave her a reason to bring what lived between them into the fluorescent daylight of the workplace. She watched all of it and filed it away, because she was Naomi Fletcher, and she did not miss things. He was protecting her. But the question was, why? The answer came on an unremarkable Wednesday afternoon in the company's archive system, where Naomi had been working late pulling historical financials for a governance audit, looking for anything tangible to pull Sebastian down. She almost missed it. The account was buried inside a foundation's disbursement records. A scholarship fund established anonymously 7 years ago. The timeline matched the year after the arrest. She almost moved past it. But she didn't. She pulled the thread. Quietly. Carefully. Over 3 evenings, cross-referencing routing codes and trustee filings, until the trail stopped being anonymous. The fund had a source. Sebastian Alder had paid for her MBA. All of it. Every semester. Every fee. Deposited through a blind trust, untraceable, unless you knew what you were looking for. She sat in front of her screen for a long time and felt something she hadn't anticipated. Fury. Not gratitude. Fury. Because gratitude would have been simpler. Gratitude would have been clean. This was not clean. This was a man who had dismantled her family and then quietly, privately, made sure she could rebuild herself. And the question she could not answer, the one that was making her hands press flat against the desk to keep them still, was the most important one. Was this control or was it conscience? She didn't know. And not knowing was worse than anything she had prepared for. The second thing she found came from her father. She had not spoken to Gerald Fletcher in 4 years. a wall she had built to survive the confusion of loving someone who had done what he had done. But she needed answers now, and she drove to the Federal Correctional Facility on a Friday morning and sat across a table from a man who had aged in the specific way that confinement ages people. Hollowed out, stripped of the easy confidence that had once filled every room he entered, she asked him directly, "Did you know the investigation was coming?" A long silence. "Yes," he said. "How long?" He looked at the table. "He came to me himself, 48 hours before the arrest. Told me privately. Said if I cooperated fully, it would go differently." The room between them contracted. "And you didn't cooperate?" Her father's jaw tightened. "I moved what I could. I thought—" He stopped. Started again. "I thought I could still protect us." Naomi looked at the man she had loved her entire life and felt something crack open that would never fully close again. Sebastian Alder had given her father 48 hours. Not because the law required it. Not because procedure demanded it. He had given her father 48 hours to do the right thing. And her father had used them to hide more money. She drove home and did not cry. She was past the place where crying helped. But somewhere on the bridge, with the city behind her and nothing but dark water on either side, she pulled over. Just for a moment. Sat with her, hands in her lap and her braids falling forward, and let herself feel the things she had been too busy surviving to feel. Not anger at her father. Not gratitude toward Sebastian. Something quieter and more personal than either. Grief for the version of herself that had existed before the ballroom. The girl who had believed, without question, that the people she loved were exactly who they appeared to be. That girl had been so certain. She sat with that for a long time. Then she pulled back onto the road and drove the rest of the way home in silence. She went to him that evening. His office on the top floor was still lit at 8 o'clock. She had learned by now that it usually was. She took the elevator without announcing herself, walked past his assistant, who was packing up for the night, and looked faintly alarmed and pushed open his door. Sebastian was at his desk, jacket off, reading something. He looked up when she entered and did not ask why she was there. He simply waited, with that quality of absolute stillness that she had spent months cataloging and still could not fully explain. She crossed the room and placed the printed fund documents on his desk. He looked at them, then at her. "You paid for my MBA." He said nothing, which was its own answer. "Why did you warn him?" "The 48 hours. Why?" Sebastian leaned back slowly. When he spoke, his voice was exactly what it always was. Measured, unhurried, devoid of performance. "Because I wanted him to have the choice to be who I believed he was. And when he wasn't, then I made a different choice. Without hesitation. I don't make decisions to be loved, Naomi. I make them to be correct." She had heard variations of that line in interviews. Had read it in profiles. Had always found it cold. Standing inside it now, directed at her, she found it was something else. Not cold at all, but the particular temperature of a man who had long since stopped performing for an audience. "Why hire me?" she asked. "You knew exactly who I was and why I came." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city continued in its indifferent brilliance. "Because you deserved to be close to the truth instead of spending your life circling it from the outside. And because—" He stopped. The silence in the room shifted. "And because I never stopped thinking about you. About how you looked at me in that ballroom, like I destroyed your life." He said it the way he said everything. Evenly, without apology, without softening. Like a fact he had simply decided to stop withholding. It was confession without theater. "I noticed you long before I wanted to. And I couldn't help but have thoughts about you. Somewhere along the line, you became—" He paused and swallowed hard. You became more than my thought. But I kept my distance. I made sure you were equipped. And I waited for you to find your own way to the truth. He held her gaze. I am not asking you for anything. I just needed you to know. For a moment, something shifted in his face. Not much. Just enough. The particular exhaustion of a man who has been disciplined for so long that discipline has become its own kind of loneliness. And who has only just in this room, in front of her, allowed himself to feel the full weight of what that cost. It lasted less than 3 seconds. Then it was gone, folded back behind everything he was trained to be. But she had seen it. And she understood for the first time that controlling himself around her had not been easy. That it had been a choice he made over and over for 7 years. Every day she sat across a boardroom table from him. Every meeting. Every corridor they passed through without incident. Every single time. Naomi stood in his office for a long time. She thought about the ballroom. About the smile that held 3 seconds too long. About her father's hands against a table in a correctional facility. About a scholarship routed through a blind trust, and a man who had stood at the far end of a ruined night and watched her without looking away. She thought about the question she had been carrying for 7 years. Was this control or was it conscience? She did not answer him that night. She picked up the documents and she left. But the revenge plan, the careful 7-year architecture of dismantling everything he'd built, had quietly stopped making sense in a room that smelled like old books and city light. And she hated him a little for that, too. 3 weeks after their confrontation, Naomi had an important presentation for the company. The client's name was Roland Voss. European money, 3rd generation, the kind of man who had never been told no by anyone who needed something from him. And Alder Group, at this particular juncture, needed the Voss portfolio badly enough that 3 senior partners had spent 6 weeks making sure everything about this presentation was perfect. Naomi had been assigned to lead it. She stood at the head of the conference table in a tailored ivory blazer, braids pinned back, and walked Voss and his team through the restructuring proposal with the kind of precision that made people forget they were being impressed. She knew the numbers the way she knew her own name. She had built the framework herself, anticipated every counter-argument, and she was midway through the 3rd section when Voss leaned back in his chair and said, with the particular ease of a man performing for his own team, I have to say, I find it much easier to pay attention when the presentation is this. Visually engaging. His eyes didn't leave her. The room went a specific kind of quiet. The kind that happens when something has been said that everyone heard and no one is going to acknowledge. 2 of the junior associates found their laptops very interesting. One of the senior partners cleared his throat. Naomi didn't miss a beat. She turned to the next slide and kept going, because she had learned long ago the particular discipline of not letting men like Roland Voss become the most important thing in a room she was running. She was 3 sentences into the next section when Sebastian spoke. He had been sitting at the far end of the table, as he always did in these meetings. Present but peripheral, there to close if needed, otherwise invisible. He had not spoken once in 40 minutes. He spoke now. Mr. Voss. Just the name. But the temperature in the room dropped. Voss turned, faintly amused. Alder. You'll want to apologize to Miss Fletcher. Not a suggestion. Not a corporate softening. A fact stated in the same tone Sebastian Alder used to close deals and end careers. Voss's amusement didn't disappear immediately. It took a moment, the way it does with men who aren't used to being spoken to that way. Then something shifted in his face. His eyes moved from Sebastian to Naomi and back. I meant it as a compliment. I know what you meant. Sebastian set down his pen. Apologize, or we're done here. The silence that followed was enormous. Naomi had gone very still. She could feel every eye in the room without looking at a single person. Voss let out a short sound. Not quite a laugh. He looked at Sebastian with the expression of a man recalibrating who he was dealing with. Then he looked at Naomi and said, with zero warmth, "My apologies, Miss Fletcher." The kind of apology that is really a threat, delivered quietly enough to maintain plausible deniability. "We're done," Sebastian said anyway. The room didn't breathe. "Excuse me?" Voss said. "The meeting is over. My team will be in touch regarding the terms of our disengagement." He stood, buttoned his jacket. "I'll have someone show you out." Voss left. And what left with him was 6 weeks of preparation, a 9-figure portfolio, and any remaining uncertainty in that conference room about what Sebastian Alder felt for Naomi Fletcher. Nobody said it aloud. Nobody had to. By the end of the day, it was already moving. Through assistant whispers and elevator silences, and the particular speed with which information travels inside a building full of people who are paid to notice things. By the following morning, it had reached the board. The meeting they called was framed carefully. Concerns about optics, professional boundaries, the integrity of the Voss relationship, and whether it could be salvaged. What it was, plainly, was this. Someone had to absorb the cost of what happened in that conference room, and it was not going to be Sebastian Alder. It was going to be her. Naomi sat across from 4 board members and listened to the language of institutional self-protection dressed up as concern. Conflict of interest. Perception of favoritism. The difficulty of her position given her history with the CEO. All of it technically about her. None of it actually about her. She said very little. She had learned by now that some rooms are not asking for your defense. That evening, Sebastian called a press conference. She found out from his assistant. She called him immediately. "Don't," she said when he picked up. "It's already scheduled." "Sebastian." Her voice was low. "I have handled worse than this. I do not need you to. I know you don't need me to." A pause. "This isn't about what you need," he said quietly. "They are going to remove you to protect an institution from the consequences of my actions. I won't allow that. And if I'm asking you not to?" The silence between them carried everything they had not yet said to each other. The confrontation, the confession, the bridge, the distance she had kept since. All of it sitting in the space of a phone call neither of them had planned on having. She stood at her window for a long time after he hung up, the city spread out below her, and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not anger. Not relief. Something that frightened her more than either. The certainty that no one had ever chosen her cost before. She arrived 20 minutes before it started. Not because she had changed her mind. Because she had sat with the window and the city and that frightening certainty for 2 hours. And at the end of it, she understood something she hadn't when she hung up the phone. Sebastian was going to stand at that podium and take everything onto himself. He would be precise and controlled, and he would say exactly enough to neutralize the board's position and protect her job. And he would do it in the particular way he did everything, which was without asking anyone's permission and without leaving room for the narrative to be rewritten afterward. He was going to handle it. And the story that came out of it would be his story. About him. His decision, his defense, his version of events. With Naomi Fletcher as the subject, not the author. She had spent 7 years refusing to be handled. She was not about to start now. The press room was fuller than she expected. Word had traveled fast. It always did when Sebastian Alder called a conference unscheduled, on 24 hours' notice, with no stated agenda. Journalists who covered finance were there alongside ones who covered culture and gossip, and the particular intersection of power and personal life that generated the most reliable traffic. Cameras lined the back wall. The energy in the room was the specific, barely contained alertness of people who know something is about to happen and are not entirely sure what. Sebastian opened with 3 minutes that gave the journalists nothing to enjoy. He addressed the board's position directly, on the record with clarity. Naomi Fletcher's proposal in the Voss meeting was the strongest in the room. The termination of that negotiation was his decision, made on conduct grounds, and had no bearing on her performance or her standing. Any move toward her dismissal was institutional deflection, and he would be challenging it formally. He said it without theater. He said it once. Then he opened the floor. The professional questions lasted 4 minutes before the room gave up, pretending that was what they were really there for. Mr. Alder, is it true that Naomi Fletcher is the daughter of Gerald Fletcher, whose conviction you testified to directly? Yes. And you hired her knowing that? Yes. Was that not itself a conflict of interest? Hiring the most qualified candidate in the pool is not a conflict of interest. Mr. Alder. The journalist leaned forward. Was your reaction to Voss in that meeting professional or personal? The room stilled. It was correct, Sebastian said. That's not what I asked. I know. He didn't elaborate, and the silence he left behind said more than elaboration would have. That was when Naomi walked in. She had heard enough from the side door. He had done what he came to do. Cleared the professional ground, removed the board's footing, put it all on record. Clean and efficient and entirely like him. But the last question was still hanging in the air unanswered, and she knew, if she left it there, it would be answered for them. By journalists, by the board, by people with less information and more imagination. She walked to the front and stood beside him. He looked at her. She looked back. 3 seconds of everything unsaid. She took the microphone. Yes, she said. I came to this company knowing exactly who he was, and I came with a plan that had nothing to do with building something. She let the room absorb that. My father went to prison because of a choice this man made. I spent 7 years deciding what to do with that. What I found, when I stopped being angry long enough to look clearly, was a man who gave his someone he perceived good 48 hours to do the right thing. And when that man didn't, reported him anyway. Who then quietly made sure the daughter had every resource she needed to build her own life. Without her permission. Without expecting anything back. She looked at the journalist who had asked the last question. You want to know if his reaction to Voss was personal? Yes. It was. So was mine when I walked in here just now. We are not going to apologize for that. A beat. What I will say is this. The man who defended me in that meeting is the same man who told the truth about my father. He does not do things halfway. He does not protect what he does not believe is worth protecting. She paused. Just briefly. Make of that what you will. She reached down and took his hand. The flashbulbs exploded. Sebastian, for the first time in a room full of witnesses, made no effort to compose his expression. He just looked at her, the way he had been looking at her, privately, for 7 years. Naomi faced the cameras and felt, beneath the steadiness she was holding, something unfinished and enormous, not an ending. The opposite of an ending. There was so much they didn't know. There was so much she still had to learn about him. But his hand was warm. And it was real. For now, that was enough.